Hello, and welcome to the Apple Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Wesley Hilliard, and I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Masterclass and Rogue Amoeba. I'm joined once again by William Gallagher. We're going to get into a bunch of Apple Insider, this is the problem with all the AI stuff. You never know which word's going to come out next. We're going to get into a lot of Apple Intelligence topics this week. I do want to point out that the fun of recording and then releasing a day later always means something's going to happen, and I swear, the moment we stopped recording is when Apple delayed Apple Intelligence contextual information. So always fun. William, what do you think of this? Should we have issued a correction last week and jumped right back into it?
I would like to have been issued a refund. Mostly because separately I'm actually considerably poorer than I was last time we spoke, to the tune of one Mac Studio, poorer in fact. But I've obviously bought it because the Mac Studio is ready for Apple Intelligence. That's the only reason I bought it, yeah.
Yeah, and you get the same Apple Intelligence whether it's an M3 Ultra or an M1, so I wonder if that's going to change soon. But we'll get into Apple's future with this stuff later. I think it's important to dive right in.
Yeah.
Apple announced, I think, Thursday afternoon or maybe early Friday. I'm not sure where it landed in the timeline, but it was after we recorded that they're going to the features announced during WWDC. There's not a real word for it. Contextual Siri. It has to do with the App Intents API that will attach your personal information on your device to Apple Intelligence to allow it to draw information from apps or what's on your screen. That has been pushed back to, quote, later in 2025. And there have been a lot of takes on this. And I would like to point out that my stance last week is mostly the same. We didn't have a official delay until we did. And now that it is delayed, I still think that the timeline isn't too terrible. So me personally, I'm not offended by Apple delaying this feature. If anything, I'm happy because they're finally taking a breath and saying, forget the stockholders, let's make sure this thing works. And I was so caught up in the zeitgeist of it, I belted out 5,000 words on the topic just to discuss where Apple is on this whole AI thing and why people think they are behind. Did you get a chance to look at that, William?
I did, except I'm astounded it's 5,000 words long. It's a really quick read, I thought. So unless you just your AI didn't count correctly on the word count. Yes, I read that. And then it's interesting, John Gruber now is doing much the same as you did, but perhaps a little more stridently, forcefully, perhaps. I think you're more optimistic about the future than some.
We're two sides of the same coin. And honestly, I could have written what John Gruber wrote, because he echoes my sentiments exactly. We talked about two different things. If you go into the pieces thinking we're having the same discussion, we're just not. I'm talking about the perception of Apple Intelligence from the outside created by the grift being sold by third parties like OpenAI and Google Gemini, and how that makes Apple look like they're perpetually behind in a race where there's no end goal in sight and no real conclusion. We don't even know what winning looks like in this race. We just know that Apple isn't where everyone else is. I will admit that they're not at ChatGPT level. It would be silly to say so, but the idea that they're behind, I guess, it depends on where you're standing, where you're viewing everything. Because from my point of view, they're ahead, because out of all of the AI, they're the only ones doing anything for me. They're the only ones who actually have saved me money so far. And they're the only ones that are private and secure that I trust with my information. I don't want ChatGPT or Google Gemini on my device sucking up all of my information. I would never trust them to do that. But I trust Apple to do that. And I think that's the difference here.
It's just not a particularly marketable difference. It's not as whizzy as some of these other things are, and Apple has tried to be whizzy about it. I think that's where I have a problem with them now. Although
it's downright boring.
I thought boring was good, but
So the other side of this coin, and we'll get to that in a moment, is Gruber's take, and again, I agree with it. I looked externally, he looked internally, and Apple and its approach to Apple Intelligence shows a shifting, maybe a shift, we don't know, but a shifting like internal process for making these kinds of decisions. They would have never previously announced something that wasn't at least demoable and that could come in the next year. But by all signs, it looks like it wasn't even working when they announced it at WWDC. They couldn't even demo it to anyone, and the commercial itself, the one ad they showed for this, thankfully there wasn't more, was completely fabricated, of course, because an ad, most ads are. Even if it works, they mostly just fake it just because they don't want it to break in the middle of a shoot. But
Sure.
In any case, I don't think that's the important part here. I agree with Gruber that there is a chance that Apple bit off more than they could chew, but I think it was a reaction, maybe an overreaction to all of the pressure. Because again, read my piece, this time last year in 2024, every article was about how Apple doesn't even know what artificial intelligence is. It's not even working on it. It's so far behind that it's just ignoring it. And Apple has been left in the revolution, and someone's going to step in and make an AI smartphone and kill the iPhone. That was the kind of stories we were seeing, while simultaneously talking about how Google Gemini recommends putting glue on cheese pizza. So I think there was a material disconnect between reality and what was shipping and the conversation about how Apple was not involved. And Apple uncharacteristically reacted. They normally just ignore it, and they're really good at ignoring things.
This is exactly what I was thinking. I'm with you on everything except you've never known Apple to be so reactive to things. Mm-hmm. It's normally a long game for them, and it's worked out well for them. But this time, something's different. Yeah.
Gruber landed on Tim Cook. Yes, the buck stops with the CEO, but I'm not sure it was 100% him. I think it was just a pile of everything. There was probably pressures from everywhere within the company. Someone was overpromising, right? I mean, we know that tech demos, even to the CEO, can be faked. They pulled the same thing with Steve Jobs a couple of times, trying to make him believe that the GUI on the Mac worked before it was ready. And there's just a lot of craziness that happens within Apple that we don't know about. But I would love to know the conversation that led to this ad being aired before the feature even worked. Now, that is Gruber's conclusion. I'm not so sure. I think it's always worked to an extent, and that's the only reason why Apple would come out this far. There's something that I'm not sure that Gruber even... I read the whole thing, and I'm not remembering it, so maybe this is true. I don't think he addressed this, and I think this is crucial in this discussion. Something's changed since the announcement of Apple Intelligence at WWDC and today. Hallucinations, Apple thought it was going to get around them, but the summaries and notifications, as pointed out by BBC, not dangerous because summaries are not really anything you act on. They're just, triage. So no harm done, but BBC still doesn't want the wrong headline showing up next to its name.
Well, actually, you say not dangerous, but for the BBC, there are legal implications. And actually, I was fooled. But as I mentioned to you ages ago, somebody pulled out of a project of mine, and fine, they had to, no problem with that. But the summary I had was that they were leaving, but they hoped to come back soon, and that was not true. The truth was someone else in the project said, hopefully you'll come back sometime. So I read it, and I was acting on the wrong information because I had to call somebody about it, had to do something. So, yeah, my fault for not looking further, but you're not supposed to have to look further, are you?
And I think that's the point. So, yes, we shouldn't have to open the email and then verify that summary is correct. But we still do today. And maybe it'll get there, but it is just not there yet. And I don't think any AI is there yet. ChatGPT, Google Gemini, there's research showing that 60% of their results are incorrect. Wow. That is staggering, right? Yeah. Google search was wrong before, but it was never 60%. It would just
if you're going to rip off the world's creatives and steal every text, you could at least get it right afterwards.
Right.
I mean, they're not even trying, are they?
So I think Apple had a working system. It's not like the app intents didn't exist. They already had it, right? And they were already working internally on the system. We have evidence that shows the Ajax LLM that Apple was working on that ultimately led to Apple Intelligence was also parsing app intents data, right? They were already working on getting information from their own internal apps like reminders and calendar and stuff. So app intents have been around for a few generations. I can't remember which iOS, but it was a while back. And Apple's been allowing developers to build those into the Apple Intelligence system since iOS 18.2. That didn't get delayed. So I think that those are the missing pieces from Gruber's overall assessment. Apple wouldn't have rolled out that API system at 18.2 that allows them to start building for it if it still wasn't on track. The change was the reaction and adjustment for notification summaries because they were hallucinating. And when they start doing things like telling you when your mom's flight's going to land so you can schedule an Uber, it can't be wrong, period. So I think something was working. It just wasn't ready. It wasn't all the way there. And in this situation, this is airplane-like logic, safety logic. You can't have 1 out of 10 jets crash.
Yeah.
Right? It needs to be 1 in every 10 million. It just can't be wrong. So Apple pulled back, examined it, and I think they realized maybe, and this is connecting to rumors now, the only way we go forward with this is if we get to the LLM-based Siri and introduce it along that, so that way we have more layers of checks and balances. Because if it's an LLM-based Siri collecting the information from the back-end Apple Intelligence system, which would be two separate LLMs checking each other, you'll have more chances to catch wrong information. And then they could possibly build even, again, a third layer LLM that resides over the system as a kind of fact checker. And of course, all of these could hallucinate simultaneously, but more layers you add to this, the less likely you're going to lead to that. And I think that is where we're going, and that's why end of 2025 is possible.
How do you reconcile the fact that Siri at the moment is demonstrably worse than it used to be, and it's trying to chuck things at ChatGPT that ChatGPT can't answer, and that neither can it? There's something fundamentally wrong with Siri now, and I don't understand why, if this is all a new system yet to come.
I think the issues with Siri are tied to the logic that is meant to throw to ChatGPT. It's the logic is just too strong. It basically, what used to be a web search is now going to ChatGPT, and it can't know certain things like what your personal information is, and it's making mistakes based on that. Again, it's so important to understand. There is nothing about Siri that is an intelligence, AI, whatever you want to call it, an LLM today. It is still the same machine learning model, maybe improved a bit, but it's still ML from a couple years ago before Apple even uttered the words Apple Intelligence. It is still the same Siri, and Apple Intelligence is basically an app it calls out to for information. So nothing has changed about Siri. It's kind of like downloading an app that takes over the PDF file extension, and for some reason, every time you open a PDF, now it's opening in this sketchy random app you downloaded that's not meant to do that. That's basically what's happened here. It's not that Siri got worse, it's just that the complexity increased, and now it's not making the right decision about which things should call out to which.
That makes sense, except how about this? I used Siri earlier, and it did this thing of chucking a question out of ChatGPT, and this time ChatGPT, it was something it could answer. I'm based here in the UK, and the clocks here are changing at a different date to the US, so I just asked Siri, as I thought, when did the clocks change in the UK? Chucked the question to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT came back and fully detailed the clock change for the US, not the UK.
Yep.
So that? Where is the logic? Siri is obviously not passing even remotely geolocated data to ChatGPT, and therefore making it worthless even when it works.
Yes, the privacy angle is difficult to overcome as well. And there's certain things. So this is an example of maybe it, at least today, that's a question I never personally would have asked Siri. I would have went to the web and searched it or used Spotlight to search it. But it's interesting how people use this product, because I've mentioned it before and it's still true. I'm a Siri unicorn. I only use it for what it does. And maybe it's just because of that I don't run into all these issues. I've not personally seen it get any worse because I'm not asking it complicated questions. I'm not asking it what time it is or when was the Super Bowl or anything like that. I'm telling it to control my home. I'm telling it to play music.
I would object with this here because I'm not asking it things it didn't used to be able to do. I mean, simple, basic stuff. I wouldn't have said I was a big Siri user. And it happened this morning. My hands were full. There was the phone on the table next to me. It was a sensible enough, simple thing to do. And I believe it would have worked before. So
I believe the information side of Siri is broken. Like that is totally provable and likely true. It's just not a side of Siri that I use. But and maybe people should stop relying on it that way until Apple fixes it, because I think this is part of the growing pains of trying to build these new systems. Apple, if you read my piece, I think Apple was always working towards Apple Intelligence, right? We've seen signs of AI. In my research, I found that ChatGPT, OpenAI was announcing its research into generative AI the same year Apple released its initial research into AI as well. They started at the same point in 2016. The Neural Engine released shortly after, and Apple has clearly been working towards AI the same time frame as OpenAI, but they obviously didn't see it as important or didn't put enough resources behind it, because OpenAI released their model in 2022, 3 years ostensibly before Apple was going to, because by all signs, Apple was never going to announce anything AI related in 2024. And in 2023, when all the pressure was building, a lot of the AI stuff being announced by its competitors was still ML. They were just calling it AI to try and sound cool. And then it switched to AI, and then it seemed as if Apple just wasn't even playing in the same field. So they had to announce something. And I think it's fine that they did, even if it wasn't totally ready. But I think the original timetable was that this WWDC, we were going to get the polished versions of what we have now and promises of what was to come. And instead, they moved that entire announcement window back a year, and consequences of releasing something publicly. Yes, they could demo to Tim Cook these app intent systems could work. I think they could, but they were not ready for the hallucinations of what could possibly happen and the danger of releasing it to people that might rely on this information. And then they saw the pushback from what happens just from when news headlines are wrong, let alone all the other information that could go wrong. So all in all, I think Apple Intelligence personally is fine. Like, we can get to Gruber's piece in just a second. But like, as far as this quote unquote race goes, it's not that anyone's ahead or behind. They're all playing different games.
I realize I'm coming across as kind of the grumpy one here, and I do clearly use Siri more than you, but I have got to the stage where I stopped using Siri most of the time because I know it's not going to work. And so Apple will have to convince me to try it again. I'll have to remember to try again when I've kind of mentally written it off. But even though I would be with you on saying Apple Intelligence is better than the flashier things that go wrong, right now it is going wrong, and Apple is pushing like mad that we should get the whole iPhone 16e. Everything about it was Apple Intelligence, and it isn't.
It's a problem.
I didn't think of this actually until your piece and then John Gruber's, but let's just talk about the ad that Apple has pulled, the one of using Apple Intelligence to identify somebody you met before, which is a great ad and a really good use of AI. You would adopt straight away. Pulling that is one thing. They put that out months ago when it had no possibility of working. But also you pointed out that even before then, they did a Genmoji ad, which nothing in it was actually Genmoji. It was all artist renderings of things. So that's two cases where they have knowingly put out something, advertising something that isn't right, that doesn't work. And that shocks me, actually.
Funny enough, the ad for Genmoji put the descriptions of what you're supposed to put into the Genmoji creator to get the results. That was not there when I wrote the article. Some people pointed it out, but it still doesn't make the images in the ad, because the images in the ad are computer generated by humans, because they're beautiful and perfect, whereas what Genmoji makes is odd. It will give you something wearing a top hat or whatever, sure, but it just does not look like what was in the ad. That the ad felt fake in a way that Apple just normally doesn't fake things. It was cute and a good way to advertise, not dissimilar from buying a video game in the 90s and the box art being just this articulate, beautiful depiction of fantasy realms, and then you play the game and it's this pixel art that's barely legible. Right. But in any case, like, I don't hold that one too begrudgingly. I do think that people's reactions to the other ad that shows the app intent systems are also maybe reacting too harshly. Apple shouldn't have made this ad, I think, or released it when they did. But again, I think it just was all based on the idea that it was ready in its current form and we would fix it later. But they just had to course correct. But I don't want to get too repetitive. The overall arc here for my story was I conceptualized this race where the other assistants, these other AI systems, are racing on a track, right? You have Google Gemini, ChatGPT, and Perplexity at the starting line. They take off. And then suddenly, somewhere down the line, just this whale or just whatever jumps out from the subterranean levels behind the rest of them, leaps into the air for a moment with a giant Apple logo, and then dives back underground, right? And nobody even notices that it happened. They're still running the race, and everyone in the crowd's just like, what was that? Whatever. Where's Apple in this? We don't know what, right? And they're just back underground again, secretly hiding in their lair, waiting to come up for air. Meanwhile, a mile into the race, Alexa starts running and tries to join in mid-race as if it was running all along. See, I've been here the whole time, guys. And so my conception was, we don't know where Apple's going to pop up next. Is the next time Apple Intelligence comes up for air going to be miles behind everyone else? Is it going to be just behind them or alongside them or even ahead of them? Because my idea here is, and we've seen it, a lot of these models releasing lately are not really improvements anymore. In fact, some of them are doing things worse than they did last year. We're getting to this kind of AI ceiling. The entire internet's information has been absorbed. It's starting to get a feedback loop of eating its own information, where ChatGPT is learning from ChatGPT, and that's bad. I think we're going to hit a ceiling much faster than people assumed, and that the people at OpenAI and Google Gemini promising this Terminator level event of artificial intelligence just was never going to happen. It was all a grift. And it's going to, and that ceiling's fine because, again, it generated great tools. It gave us awesome ways to increase our productivity as humans, and that's awesome. We're going to benefit from that for decades. But it isn't going to replace humans or think for us anytime soon. And I think we're going to recoil from this very quickly. But during that recoil, during that ceiling, it will give Apple the chance to basically play catch up and ultimately be at the same level, if not ahead of everyone else, if only because it achieved the same, but with privately and securely. We saw this before. Do you remember?
The fact that CarPlay still hasn't come out? No?
No. We've seen the other side of this before. So if you look at Android versus Apple, Android started completely open and had to close things down to prevent vulnerabilities and issues from cropping up in its system. Apple started completely closed to where it didn't have to deal with those because it wasn't possible. And as Apple opened up, they would introduce features, and everyone on Android would say, oh, well, we've been doing this on Android for years. Why are you just now getting to this, Apple? And it's like, well, because it actually works now, right?
Yes.
And that's how that race of the 2010s went. And while it's not quite the same with Apple Intelligence, because other AI models can do things that Apple Intelligence can't do and probably never will, it is a sign that I think we're seeing similar conversations that, oh, Apple's only just now arriving to this. They're only just now generating images. They're only just now introducing this. When in a couple of years, all of those comparisons will be moot because everyone will be doing the same thing and they will be doing it on different levels, right? Today, you look at Android and iOS and they can virtually do similar things. They're running similar apps, but because of Apple's privacy and security angle, it is a much more secure system and something I rely on a lot more than Android. So I think that's where we are with this race. Now, quickly, because I wanted to cover Gruber as well, what did you think of his assessment?
Well, I should say, actually, we will link to John Gruber's article in the show notes in case anybody hasn't seen it. I was surprised by it, and then afterwards I realized I thought he was right. But the big unanswered question for me is, well, John Gruber has been writing about App Store for years, but he might be best known for presenting the talk show. It's like a 2-hour interview right after the WWDC keynote, in which he gets top Apple executives to come on and talk about the announcements. Will he get them on stage this year? That's what I want to know.
I don't think Apple's going to retaliate that harshly. They don't always accept criticism with grace, but that would be quite the step back from previous years. Craig Federighi and Greg Joswiak both seem okay with criticism. They just laugh it off. I mean, Gruber's asked some pretty silly questions before, knowing that they're not going to give an answer, and they're just like, yeah, we're not going to talk about that. But I think the human element of Apple is something that we forget a lot, and
sure, yeah,
I don't think they're just going to dump Gruber completely. It's not like he went and talked to an Apple employee and leaked what this system looked like internally and destroyed their credibility. He just criticized them harshly on the internet, which is something a lot of people do all the time. So there's a difference between starting a lawsuit and just being harsh.
This episode is brought to you by Masterclass. We've talked about Masterclass on the show before and said that this online video training, this mentorship really, by the world's best creatives is a bargain for you and me. But actually, it's also a great present for someone else. That's in fact how I first came to try Masterclass. I was bought a year of it as a present. And is this awful of me? Now, I can't even remember any other Christmas present I got that year. Anyway, Masterclass is a streaming platform where your loved ones or you can learn from over 200 world-class instructors. I don't know how to emphasize this enough. Whatever your field, whatever you're interested in, Masterclass has the people you would most want to learn from. And you can keep going back to them. The very first one I've watched, and I've watched it again since, is Jodie Foster's utterly compelling Masterclass on film directing. Now, I'm not a director, but she made me want to be, and I learned so much from how she told me the ways that directors work with writers. And more directly in my field, I've learned writing tips from Aaron Sorkin and Shonda Rhimes. James Cameron has nearly convinced me to watch Avatar. And I cannot believe this one. Ex-CIA officers have taught me better social skills by showing me intelligence gathering techniques. Right now, our listeners get an additional 15% off any annual membership at masterclass.com/AppleInsider15. That's 15% off at masterclass.com/AppleInsider15. So that's digits 15. Masterclass.com/AppleInsider, digit 1, digit 5. And thanks to Masterclass for supporting the Apple Insider podcast.
Overall, again, I think he has the right sentiment. I think Apple overcorrected for the artificial intelligence vibe of, oh God, we're behind, at least perceptually behind, and we need to correct that perception. And then they, of course, failed to correct that perception. If anything, they made it worse. I wonder if Apple had pulled Amazon. I don't think they could have gotten away with it because Amazon's easy to forget. Everyone just kind of gave up on Alexa because last year we were talking about how they were firing everyone and it was so unprofitable that it was losing them just millions of dollars, billions of dollars even. And we were all just like, yeah, I guess there's just not even going to be an LLM Alexa. Just focus on selling stuff, Amazon. You're doing fine. And everyone had just given up on the thought of it. And then suddenly it's, here's Alexa Plus. And it's just like, the whole world exploded and said, "Oh wow, look how behind Apple is." And it's just like they didn't even enter the race till today, and they're not even going to be out with anything for another month. We don't even know what if it's going to work. But anyway, gotta love the commentary around Apple stuff these days. But the idea that Apple shouldn't have announced that at WWDC, I think, is wrong. I think the ad shouldn't have come out so soon, or they should have like coming later or something in the ad. Like, you will eventually be able to do this. They should have prefaced it with like, yeah, Apple Intelligence will eventually do this thing. But then what's the point of the ad? But all this talk, and we can close up with this, and I say it in my article too. It doesn't matter because we're the only ones really criticizing at this level. Tech, punditry, media are the only ones talking about it at this level. No one else on Earth really cares. Who actually, outside of us, is talking about AI at this level that they know what it does and what it's for? I made the allusion to Idiocracy because it's a pretty good movie, becoming more and more every day a documentary, but are you aware of Idiocracy, Mike Judge?
No, never heard of it. Heard of him, but yeah. What have I missed?
Mike Judge, King of the Hill, Beavis and Butthead. Yeah. He's also the guy behind Office Space. Excellent, perfect movie. He made a movie in 2006 called Idiocracy. I'll get through this briefly, but it's the idea that the military invented a machine that allowed them to freeze army men that would be super great to have in the future if we ever had a war. So they tested it on a guy who was a perfectly center of the pole average human being because they wanted to make sure it would, anywhere on the scale you would survive this freezing process. Well, him and a prostitute gets frozen, and then they can the entire thing and accidentally bury them in rubble, forgetting about them for I forget, 1,000 years. It's some stupid year in the future. Maybe it's like 400 years. I can't remember the exact year. But basically, during this time, the world gets very dumb. And if you don't watch the entire movie, watch the first 5 minutes of the movie because it's a fake medical study of why smart people are just stopped having kids because they're always waiting for the right moment. And all the dumb people are reproducing at massive rates until they just create a completely stupid, idiotic society. And they wake up to a world where Mountain Dew, Taco Bell, Dr. Pepper, conglomerate of the United States government is running the world, and it's magnificent in every single way. It is such a silly movie. Carl's Jr. will repossess your kids if you can't afford to buy a sandwich, right? So anyway, I digress. In the movie, there's a plot line around this energy drink named Brondo. It became so popular that they were worried that they were losing competition to water. So they bought out the FDA and the FCC and made Brondo the official drink of the United States. And to the point that they required it to be used to water crops, which Brondo is basically an energy drink, like with electrolytes, right? Like Gatorade. And they were using it to water crops, which created a dust bowl because it's just, electrolytes are just salt. Killed all the plants. And they were about to all starve to death. And the quote-unquote guy from the past, who's now the smartest man on Earth, helps them fix it by teaching them how to water plants again. Long story short, the catchphrase of Brondo is, Brondo, it's got electrolytes. And everyone in the entire history of the movie just quotes this catchphrase over and over. And the guy's just like, do you even know what electrolytes are? And they're like, yeah, it's what's in Brondo. And it's what plants crave. And they just keep repeating the advertisement. And I think, weirdly enough, this is how not Apple Intelligence, but artificial intelligence is going. Everyone's just saying, yeah, it's got AI in it. What is AI? It's what's in the machine. It's what we need. We need AI. Well, what does it do for you? It does things because it's AI. Why are you asking me these stupid questions? And that's where I think the discourse has gotten on artificial intelligence. Truly, it's bad. And it's just a hammer. And people keep treating it like it's the return of Jesus Christ. Like, it's just a tool. And that's the framing of my story. And I long story short, I think that Apple is not as doomed as people are making it out to be, but it still makes for a good conversation.
Just to this point that everybody is basically reciting AI as a litany, this week I was booked to talk to an arts organisation about the use of AI and the problems of it, the various controversies that are, the behind the scenes of contractual stuff that's really messing around, the copyrights and all sorts of things. And actually, the whole thing was cancelled because too few people signed up for it. And I was wondering, is that just like AI burnout? People have had too much of it to talk about. And is that actually an awful thing because people are just not going to be aware of it? Have we talked about it so much that the good and the bad is going to get through?
People shouldn't need to worry about it. They shouldn't need to know about it. It should not even be an ad. That's what's so silly about all of this.
Oh, but I think you're thinking of AI as the tool it actually is, and I'm thinking at least equally of contractual stuff to do with the use of AI and the rights of it. So the legal side of it. And I think that is being, at least in the UK, where obviously like anywhere else is being discussed, our government is trying to do all sorts of things with AI that really would basically... The UK would like to give American companies the rights to every artistic thing in the UK. And I feel there's a small problem there. That's the kind of issue that I think is just getting lost in initially the hype and now the kind of burned out section of it.
It's hard to regulate the horses back into the barn. Mm-hmm. It's already done. They've stolen everything. They've repackaged it. And they've sold it back to us as a miracle cure for all of our problems that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And it's done. The grift is complete. They don't need to steal anything else. They already have it. The only thing they don't have is what's being created ahead of today. They didn't go into the future and steal everything too. So I understand the sentiment of regulation at this point, and I disagree with their theft, but it's done. There's nothing we can really do about it. I think that they should have gone about this differently, and it would have taken longer, but taking longer would have been a good thing because, again, you shouldn't be creating billion-dollar businesses, trillion-dollar businesses off of the back of a hammer, right?
No.
It's just that. It's a tool, and it will always be a tool. People buying an iPhone don't know what chipset's in it. They don't know what operating system's in it. They only know that the camera's nice and they like the display. They couldn't tell you the resolution of the screen if they tried. If Apple Intelligence is in it, great. It helps them do things probably faster, more efficiently. That's the end of it. It's a feature. It just like Steve Jobs said back in the day about Dropbox and cloud storage. It's not a company. OpenAI, honestly, should not be what it is today. It's a grift. It's all BS to get people a lot of money. And they keep promising us more and more. They're going to invent sentience. They're going to invent, they're going to replace work. They're going to end the economy and nobody's going to have to work anymore. And everyone can paint paintings while AI does the work. It's all nonsense. Doesn't exist. Not real.
Apart from that, I want to throw in the word allegedly about OpenAI's promises and things at this time. I think I will be with you. I think when this all shakes out, we will have some nice tools and they will be useful. And we have some of them now, and that's great. But right at the moment, I'm seeing so many things outside of AI that are, let's say, hinky and causing problems with it. That it isn't actually AI itself. So,
if we haven't talked enough about artificial intelligence and Apple Intelligence, just wait for Apple Insider Plus, the paid portion of the show, where you get the show ad-free and then an addition at the end. We're going to be discussing a little bit more of our personal concepts around artificial intelligence, our uses of it, and where we think this whole thing is going as far as that goes. It'll be more of an. I know we shared some opinions here, but it'll be more specific to our workflows and how we're using the technology and where we hope it ends up. Not the world ending up, but the more realistic approach. But more to the show and more to Apple. I am excited to see what WWDC brings. I want to see what Apple Intelligence brings in iOS 19. And I'm excited for LLM Siri and everything that is coming. This technology is exciting when you treat it like it is a hammer. And the last thing you need a hammer for, though, is a piece of glass that you hang in your home to tell you what is going on. The Home Hub, we knew this was coming, and I don't know why this is really being treated as news, because I think we already reported it, but it's being shared again by just different leakers. It's not shipping until at least iOS 19, and it's not shipping at least until Apple Intelligence is up to snuff. Kind of knew that. We just didn't know when those things would happen, when the Apple Intelligence updates would be here. At first, it seemed spring to a summer release was likely. That Apple could reveal this new tablet device at WWDC and ship it in the fall, which is still possible. Again, 2025, we're in it. And Apple says that the new context systems are still coming. They could miss that, of course. And indicators show they might miss that, but we'll see. Right now, though, I'm still hopeful, and I want to buy one of these Home Hub guys.
Right. We're still at the stage where I'm willing to take a look at it, and you're willing to just hand over your money right away. So, yeah. I mean, I expect I'll come over to your side once Apple has shown me the way and demonstrated it. But, of course, part of me is thinking, well, they've demonstrated bits of Siri that don't work. Do I trust them anymore?
See, and we could do a whole show on trust in Apple. I mean, and we can move on because I want to discuss a couple of other things in the show. We're so caught up in the beautiful, pristine, marble-cased walls of the Apple walled garden that we always forget to peek over and see the hellstorm it is to be a fan of other companies and all of their promises that are just made up. Like, I know Apple is maybe shifting away from those pristine walls a little bit, right? We saw it with Apple Intelligence, AirPower. You know, people keep bringing that up lately for some reason. It was a promise that just wasn't met because we got better technology out of it called MagSafe.
Yeah.
CarPlay was more of a vehicle manufacturer issue than I think Apple's CarPlay systems are ready. It's just not being implemented by manufacturers because they're...
No questions, like, isn't there 20 car manufacturers and none of them have CarPlay as a priority? They've got all their other stuff, so it's no surprise at all, except Apple, explicitly promised end of 23 for one thing, end of 24 for another, and they should have known it wasn't going to happen. So they didn't have to promise dates. This episode is brought to you by Rogue Amoeba, makers of absolutely superb audio tools for the Mac for over 20 years. Oh, you can hear this in my voice, can't you? I am so pleased to get to enthuse at you about Rogue Amoeba. I mean, what you're listening to right now is being recorded in that company's Audio Hijack app. And Audio Hijack can record anything, any audio whatsoever. If you can hear it on your Mac, Audio Hijack can record it. And however it does all of that behind the scenes, when you and I want to record something, we set it up so easily by just dragging different blocks into place. Here's a block for recording from the microphone. Here's one for recording any audio in Safari. A block, and this is fairly new actually, but very handy, a block to just automatically transcribe any audio while it's being recorded. And then blocks to say audio should be recorded in this format, or it should be played out to that headphone, these speakers. Actually, that routing of audio to different headphones and speakers, and of course, that's something you do not realize is so useful until you have Rogue Amoeba's Sound Source. Sound Source can make it so that, for instance, notification bleeps, well, they play out on the Mac's little tiny built-in speaker, but the music you're listening to, no, that comes from your HomePods. Sound Source, it even lets you turn up or down the volume on sounds from specific apps. So Apple Music, say, is loud, but that game is quiet, whatever you want. Free, fully featured trials of all of Rogue Amoeba's many sound apps are available before purchase. And actually, when you do purchase it, when you do buy it, there's no subscription pricing. This is a one-time charge for anything. Plus, through the end of May, you can save 20% off any purchase by using the coupon INSIDER. Visit macaudio.com/insider. So that's macaudio, macaudio.com/insider to learn more about Rogue Amoeba's apps and take advantage of this offer. macaudio.com/insider. And thanks to Rogue Amoeba for supporting the Apple Insider podcast.
And meanwhile, Google has canceled 3 messaging apps since we started this episode. So
True. Okay.
I just wonder if people maybe are a little bit complacent when they discuss these things, because yes, we are used to Apple not flubbing these things, right? The whole there's been more of these. I can't name any off the top of my head right now because it's just not front of mind, but there's been more of these in recent years than there have been maybe a decade ago, and that feels bad as an Apple fan. People are they're feeling the walls creeping in maybe a little bit, but again, you look anywhere else in this field, and I don't think Apple could ever become a Microsoft or a Google in this space. They could never just not ship dozens of products that they promised, or how's that whole answering service for third parties where you could call a business and have Google Bard or Gemini or whatever answer the phone for you, schedule your appointment, and remember how that was, leaving Siri in the dust and it made everyone look stupid, and it was so amazing that Google could pull this off. How's that going?
I am a Google Bard voice. Did you not know this? I mean, it explains quite a lot, really, when you think about it. But, okay.
Wait a minute. Yes, you mean to tell me that other companies announce things all the time that they never intend to ship, but it gets them clicks and attention, and people buy products based on these unreleased things? They do that every day? It's not just Apple?
No, I mean allegedly. That's what I mean.
Your allegedlys are getting out of control, William. I think some of these are
BBC News training here, coming out. But,
I mean, of course, as a podcast, I wonder how close you can get to the line of slander without being sued. In any case,
actually, it's libel in this case because it's broadcast.
Libel.
But yes. Look at that, the fine point of difference there. You see what I'm focused on. I can't tell you a thing about AI, but legal terms. One of them. Okay.
Apple Intelligence will certainly be a focus of iOS 19. It can't not be. But we're also hearing, now this is so fun. So Gruber's been on a bit of, he's turned into Dark Gruber or something. He's been on a bit of a tangent lately, and one I've enjoyed, not that I like piling on anyone specifically, but I do pile on Prosser sometimes, and Gurman has not been earning our trust as much lately as he used to, and I still like Mark Gurman. I still like reading his reports, and I think he has a fairly accurate history with good sources. It's just those interpretations and maybe some of those sources have gotten weaker over the years. And we saw, and I've mentioned on the show before, we've seen a few things just be outright wrong, right? MacBook Air, M3 Ultra, the release date, and the name and entire product category of iPhone 16e, Apple Intelligence, release cycles. So many things have just been outright wrong. And it's almost like Gurman's turned into an LLM where he's been reporting things very confidently to the point that the end it's kind of absurd when they're so very wrong. His forecast for the release product cycle of 2025 has just been a disaster. Like that, none of it has been accurate. And Gruber has been tearing this apart in some of his writing, which I find interesting. I'm sure Gruber has his reasons, but I tend to agree that maybe we focus too much on some of these quote-unquote accurate leakers when Ming-Chi Kuo and Gruber get things pretty wrong a lot, and it gets lost in the shuffle because this industry moves so quickly we never have time to talk about who gets things wrong. So I'm glad to see him doing that. But he once again pointed out that Gruber's report about a redesigned iOS 19 was incredibly vague, out of nowhere, and basically repeats what we already heard 2 months ago from other leakers. So I just want to point that out because it's true, but it doesn't change the fact that I think it's increasingly the case that this is going to be a pretty big redesign.
I wonder about this because it's a long time since iOS was redesigned, wasn't it? Was it 13 years ago? I'm trying to remember the dates for it. But it was 2020 when Mac OS 10 died and Mac OS Big Sur came in, and there were obvious differences for it. It wasn't gigantic, but still, as redesigns go, that was yesterday. So the fact that both of them are said to be being redesigned, I don't know, are they all going to look like Apple Vision Pro in some way?
So to close up that button on Gurman, I want to point out, because I'm pretty much, I guess, what you call the rumors guy. I keep track of all these guys, and the way I think specifically about Gurman and Ming-Chi Kuo is it's not necessarily that they're 100% accurate. They do have their flaws, but when you hear from these other sketchier sources that definitely have a very mixed track record, much lower rates of accuracy, when they're talking about, like Jon Prosser showing off a redesigned camera app, talking about this new glossy, transparent iOS 19, take it with a grain of salt and wait for someone else to say it. That's kind of my approach. Yes, I wouldn't rely on Gurman on his own reporting all the time, but when multiple people are saying it and then Gurman says it, it kind of solidifies that it's real, right? It's camera bar, and maybe, and then Ming-Chi Kuo Gurman mention it, and it's like, okay, maybe it's real. That's kind of the approach, and maybe that's broken, but it's enough that their history of getting things more right than more wrong at least tends to give it more credence when they're talking about something that sounds outlandish, right? I was hedging against a redesign because all of the rumors were coming from unreliable sources, and yet maybe Gurman isn't as reliable as he could be, right? He has lost some of that over the last few months, but again, still, he's still doing better than Prosser, who had to shave his eyebrows over something that was just completely absurdly wrong that he was very confident about. But in any case, moving on, this redesign sounds cool. I mean, I think the idea and what's the vagueness of this is annoying, but is to bring the design spectrum closer across all the operating systems, from Mac to iOS to iPad OS, TV OS, and Vision OS. It's not that everything's going to become more like Apple Vision Pro. It's that they're all just going to get a better UI that's uniform, and maybe the floating bits and transparency bits that were introduced in Vision Pro is an example of that.
That makes sense. I mean, I like Apple Vision Pro's design. I just hadn't particularly thought of it and don't particularly prefer it over any of the others. And I do love my Mac. So,
more specifically, I think I could point out, look at invites, sports.
Yeah.
The recent, like some of the changes to Apple Music. And like Apple Music got that new floating bar design for its Now Playing bar. And podcasts, I think, adopted that too. It's just little tweaks like that. So, but this is where it gets complicated, because now I think, was it Gurman that said this is the biggest redesign since iOS 7? Yeah. That makes you think, oh God, everything changes. We're going to get skeuomorphic designs and grass on the field of the game center, right? Like the Notes app's going to have yellow notepad stuff and red lines, right? I and then there's neumorphism, right? Have you seen that one where it's like all pale white and lacks contrast? Looks like Johnny Ive's White Room.
Yeah, actually, that appeals a bit more. Well, certainly more skeuomorphism, but
I think it's maybe, and I'm not going to accuse anyone of anything. This is just my opinion. Maybe pushing a little too far into clickbait to suggest that this is such a huge redesign to compare it to iOS 7. Maybe I'll be wrong. I'll happily be wrong. I like redesigns. I like new. It's exciting. As long as it doesn't break anything, new is fine. But maybe it won't be as, because I think people tend to forget. You wrote this story. The transition from iOS 6 to iOS 7 was significant.
Yes.
I remember
being excited at the time, and I liked the new look immediately. But there were some actual problems with it. Bits of it were harder to use at first, but overall, it was a good thing.
I don't know what you could do to software. my imagination just isn't there.
Yes.
Like
yeah,
what
same here.
like how could you fundamentally change software? Like the transition from skeuomorphism to the modern app identities. What would you do to have a similar level of change? Would it just have to be holograms? Like would everything have to be written in Comic Sans? I just don't know what level of change you could actually see on an iOS device.
You could adopt all the Windows UI, Windows Phone UI, because that's not being used anywhere else. That would be. I seem to remember vaguely square blocks and things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, some of which actually had live information in it, if I'm remembering correctly. So that's new.
They look like
fresh.
window panes. That's
yes.
it. Apple
Yes,
could design their operating system around what an Apple looks like. I don't know what that
means. Well, there you go. You see, you do have imagination in this. So, but
horrid. I'm curious. I don't know. We'll see. This is vague. This kind of vague rumors are always silly because it's just like, just wait till June. It's not that far away, and unless, and I agree with Gruber here because he mentioned it, unless you have something to show, why are we even talking about this? Because you know what's funny about this rumor is the same thing was rumored in iOS 18. The same thing.
Oh, right. Yes, it was.
Like, not even an exaggeration. Go look at the articles. iOS 18 is going to be a major redesign with Vision Pro elements everywhere. That was this. Maybe they had to push it back a year, and I think someone said that somewhere because they were prioritizing Apple Intelligence. So sure, I do think maybe a design change is coming, but I wouldn't look for it to be so dramatic personally.
Actually, you remind me. Last week you said Tim Cook was the best leaker of them all. I mean, 100% right every time he says anything about what Apple's going to do. So that's it. Just wait for Tim Cook to do his good morning, and it's the best iPhone we've ever made, that kind of announcement, and then you'll be sure. Yeah.
So speaking of leaks, there's some more stuff on iPhone 17. There's nothing to say here. It's all the same stuff. We're running out of stuff to talk about. They're just repeating stuff. Vapor cooling chamber. We got it. We knew about that in like 2 iPhones ago. They keep testing it and not releasing it. Maybe they won't release it again this time when we get to talk about it for iPhone 18. But Apple's testing it. It's probably coming in iPhone 17 Pro. Cool.
There's also the thickness, isn't there? There's a claim that the slim one, whatever that's going to be called, could be as much as 30% thinner than, say, the iPhone 16 or certainly the Pro Max and things. I can't really quite imagine that, and I don't know that I'll rush to get it.
This one was interesting because this isn't really any new information. We've seen as much as 6 millimeters before rumored. This one rumors closer to 5.5 millimeters.
Yeah.
But the thinness of this phone is going to be wild. But what's even crazier is the camera bar is going to be almost half the thickness of the phone.
Yes.
Where the entire phone measuring the camera bar is 9.5 millimeters, which is a millimeter thicker than the iPhone 16 Pro without the camera bar. So maybe they're onto something here. But then so that means 4 millimeters just for the camera bar. That's pretty thick. Mm-hmm. That's thicker than iPod Touches.
Goodness, is it? Okay. I'm trying to think how thin the iPad Pro was last year. Is that something like 5.1 millimeters or something?
Yeah, almost as thick as an iPad Pro, which is really funny. But not much to see here. We're going to keep seeing leaks. We saw some metal guys. Some were calling wrongly the internal chassis of the. It's not. It's probably. It's one of two things. It's either a case fitter, which is likely because there's a large. If you look at it, there's actually a place for a MagSafe mold to be put in the middle. So it looks like maybe they're building. Like it's a rubber mold, right? You would dip this into a fluoroelastomer mold, and out comes whatever thing that you would need for the case. But funny enough, it seems to be missing the camera bar section. I'm not sure exactly how this works. I don't build these cases, but it's clearly for some kind of case making. It's not a part that goes in the iPhone. Just look at it. It's thicker than an iPhone. It's really. But anyway, so. Cool. More images, more leaks, what have you. Just nothing particularly concrete or interesting. We can move on from that.
Well, actually, can we move on to the iPad? Because there's a rumor that just kind of flitted by this week, so light and distant and from a source I'd never heard of that I kind of ignored it. But you are iPad man. There is, I'm sorry, my mind's blanked on some, I have never heard of them before, market research company says they know that the M5 iPad Pro is going to be exactly the same as the M4, just with the new processor. Do they know something, or is that just incredibly obvious?
I mean, I think it's just the obvious choice. It's just like anyone who said M4 MacBook Air would be the MacBook Air with an M4 in it. Yeah, iPad Pro with M5 is an iPad Pro with M5 in it. It's in the name. iPad A17 iPad A16 is an iPad with an A16 in it. I think we figured it out.
Okay, right. So I was possibly right to just ignore that one, but okay.
It's kind of like Jeff Poo, who just comes out and says there's going to be an iPhone 17 in the fall, and then that's his leak, and it's just like,
okay. Hey,
thank you.
He's not wrong. Give him credit there. Okay,
it's like Nostradamus level of like there will be a war in the future, and it's just like, oh man, he's so accurate.
You don't think Mark Gurman's becoming Cassandra, accurately predicting and we're just not listening to him anymore? Okay, right. Different reference there. Ignore me. Okay.
Yeah, I missed that reference. But in any case, Sonos, gosh, what a tragedy. I loved Sonos. My house, I had Play 1s and Play 3s and a Play Bar and a subwoofer and a bunch of these things all over my house in about 2016. And then by about 2020, I did not. I saw the signs. Maybe I was just guessing, and I honestly, it's true, but it felt like they were going in the wrong direction. They started adding Alexa, they started doing these weird things with their app, and it just felt wrong. They promised 7.1 channels in 2015, and even today, still can't do it. So it just, Apple also gave us a solution with HomePod, so I jumped ship. Sold my Sonos system, moved to HomePod Pro. Gosh, that's going to be a product, isn't it? Moved to HomePods and HomePod Minis throughout my home. Instead, use HomePods as my speakers for my home theater system. Never looked back. Been amazing ever since, and cannot say I regret my decision as I watch Sonos slowly implode externally because, my gosh, they have abandoned their Apple TV competitor even as it was preparing to go into mass production. Isn't that just sad?
It is, but my mind's back on when you made the jump, because there was Sonos coming out with new things that were of no interest to you, no use to you, and they didn't do things they promised you, but they didn't actually change the setup you had in your house. So it was quite a leap to ditch it all and go the HomePod route, wasn't it?
Well, there were signs that they were going to abandon the system I was on slowly. They had a Sonos Gen 1 app versus Gen 2 app, and they were like, I think you can still use those original speakers. It's not like they're going to stop working. They're still connected. They're just not getting any new features or anything, and which is fine. I bought these things a while ago. I wasn't worried about the fact that they were going to end of life them. I don't think you can really end of life a speaker unless it's a HomePod. So, because there's no external connections to a HomePod. But yeah, eventually all the HomePods will brick. Like, that's just a fact of life, sadly, because there's no way to get to them externally unless you like hack them, which I've seen people do, which is interesting. But anyway, Sonos wise, I just sensed danger, and and at the time, I can't remember where this was. It could have been anywhere in the last 5 years. Time doesn't make sense anymore. But if you go back to the show when I was talking about this, because it was recent enough that I was here to talk about it, my mindset was, Apple's doing this. I trust Apple to stick around. I do not trust Sonos to stick around. I don't trust them to not get acquired by Amazon. I did the same thing when Eero went to Amazon. I just said bye. I am not going to own an Amazon router, whether or not they're a separate company. Just not going to do it. And when they started putting Alexa in Sonos, I was just like, the hair on my neck went up. I'm just like, it's not like they're collecting my data or anything, but they're clearly not prioritizing Apple, and they weren't. They were increasingly relying on their app, which got worse and worse. And in any case, I'm not here to tell you that I can predict the future. I'm here to say I wish Apple had gone through with the purchase. I can't remember who made the offer, but circa 2015, there was some leaks of discussions somewhere. Maybe it was a lie. I don't know. That there was some possibility that Apple would acquire Sonos. And man, would that not have been a better timeline for them to be on?
Speaking of companies, shall we say, in trouble, I understand, because you mentioned it earlier to me, that a TP-Link, there's something up with TP-Link, but I think I've got a TP-Link something somewhere, but I have not one thin clue what they're up to. Is this a thing?
Well, I did a review and someone made the comment, so I just wanted to bring it up here because it's important. TP-Link makes some routers. It's one of the most popular router companies on Earth. It's very popular in the United States. It's because their prices are low, and some are questioning how it's so low, and that thus the conspiracy start of they're collecting data and selling it and all that stuff. If you know what you're doing with a router, you can get around all those concerns. You just shut off all the external traffic. You can see what's coming in and out of your router. You get the what's the thing? It's like a
snitch.
Little snitch. Yeah, little sniff. You you get this thing and you can see what traffic's going on, and I don't know, unless they have a secret double encrypted backdoor that doesn't tell your connection that anything's coming. I don't know, that maybe there's some quantum physics way of hacking into your router from China. And anyway, the government put out a thing saying that they're going to investigate TP-Link because they're afraid that it's going to be used by the Chinese government to hack Americans and steal all their data and the usual TikTok style stuff. Mm-hmm. There is reason to be concerned. I mean, China did allegedly hack. Someone really did hack, but we blamed China, and they said no, and it was a hacking group, and there's all this back and forth. But someone from China did hack our telecoms to spy on Americans through a backdoor the Americans put in themselves through wiretapping. Yay us!
Backdoors are fine. Hey, yeah. I'm in the UK. Of course, I'm pro backdoor. Anyway, so a sort of semi-related question, because I've never actually used Little Snitch, but I know it's a Mac thing that tells you everything that's going in and out. Is there an iPad version of that?
No, there wouldn't be any way to do that anyway.
Right.
You just don't have the same access. But that's not the point. That would be, if I really wanted to, I could hook up my Mac Mini and do that. That's one of those weird, very specific Mac use cases that I would still have if I ever wanted to. Or like running
the
VLC
Mac
server,
wins,
or a Plex server. Okay. Yeah, can't run a Plex server from my iPad. But anyway, the router is great. Wi-Fi 7 added to my home. It's like $250 on sale right now. 3 router mesh network, awesome. I had to add a switch to get enough Ethernet ports because there's only 2 ports. That's the biggest downside. Can't specifically choose your channels. Read the review. It's a good product. But someone mentioned, why buy TP-Link? China could spy on you. I just want to point out the reason why this even occurred, this investigation's happening, is because the U.S. company Netgear, which is a virus-riddled SAD router company that no one should buy, they're mad because they're not selling well, so they're blaming China, and then they asked the U.S. government to investigate them, and that's what's happening. So until and see, and here's the thing: no security experts, even Malwarebytes is like, yeah, they're kind of weird. They don't really talk to experts the way we would like, and they don't patch as often as we would like, but they also have less vulnerabilities and have dealt with less botnets or viruses or whatever routers have overall. So the experts are saying, TP-Link's fine, but and they're saying so my answer to this is, long story short, until something comes up that can actually say that TP-Link is a dangerous router system, ignore all the nonsense, right? Everyone said TikTok was stealing U.S. whatever information to spy on us, and people, they wanted to ban it. I think it's more political than it is real, and there's no evidence of this happening. So if you guys want a really good Wi-Fi 7 system, and you're on Wi-Fi 6 or God forbid Wi-Fi 5, go get this. $250. Honestly, you literally can't go wrong. It's a really good system. Just pointing that out.
Well, given the fact that you've just made a quite strong recommendation, isn't this the point in the show when you can tell us about any recommendations people have made about the Apple Insider podcast?
And I know we're running over, but I wanted to mention real quick, as of this beta for Vision Pro, I forget which number we're on, but we got AI notification summaries, neat, with priority notifications. We got, so if you are using Safari tab groups and you're using focus modes and you're noticing that your favorites aren't showing up, you can go turn them on. They're off by default. I didn't realize that, so just want to point that out. And yeah, Spatial Gallery is cool. I hope it ends up being a cool app, but just in the wanting to mention that existed. And Metallica is a thing that I can watch in concert in Vision Pro as we record tomorrow. So neat. Can't wait to do that. If you are a listener and you enjoy our show, you can go to the Apple Podcast app and leave a review. If you hate our show, you can leave a review and tell us how much you hate it as well. We don't care. We like reviews. We like hearing what you guys have to say, and we take all of the criticism seriously, as we can anyway. And I'm happy to always hear from listeners. So this week, we got a 5-star review from Chief Brody. They said it's a solid Apple Tech show, great commentary, fantastic insight, and he said to keep up their great work. So thank you, Chief Brody. We got a 4-star review. Sadly, this one's a little bit more mournful. They love the show, aka Tony's Stark. I think that's kind of
see what they did there. Yes,
on Snark or something.
Chief Brody actually is a really familiar name. I mean, that's a character from somewhere. I want to think Jaws. Am I making this up? Anyway, I'm sorry. AKA Tony Stark said.
So 4-star, they love the show, but the recent months of political nonsense going on in the world has drug the show down, in their view anyway. So they've enjoyed everything around the show for many years, even us through the transition of hosts and everything. None of that was an issue. Been a great show for Apple News. But the personal commentary, the occasional Dark Times comment, was too much, and we should just start a show called Apple Politics, which honestly no one would listen. I wouldn't listen to that. But they do appreciate all the content over the years, but they are not going to listen anymore. Well, I'm sorry to lose you as a listener, but if you are listening to this for some reason, even though you said you quit, stick around. We are trying to put everything that would be controversial into something called Controversy Corner, isolating it to a single chapter. So those of you can still get all the Apple news you want and skip the controversy that you don't. So to walk both lines, because I will reiterate here again, we are not changing the show. We are not going to stop talking about Apple in certain aspects just because it makes people unhappy. Apple is part of the world. The world has politics, and sadly, Apple is part of politics, and it's going to come up sometimes. But in any case, thanks again for the reviews. Keep coming back to the show, guys. Leave all the reviews you want. We're always happy to see those 5 stars and how much you're enjoying the show. It really makes us excited to come in and continue recording week to week. And if you want to talk to me directly, you can always email me, wes@appleinsider.com, and get a hold of me on Blue Sky or Mastodon at Hilly Tech. You can find me pretty easily. Just search my name. And William, where can people find you?
Usually they can find me in the corner scribbling down questions of things. Oh, Wes will know about that. I'll ask him in the next one. But if you want to join me in compiling questions for Wes, I am on william@appleinsider.com, and I have a YouTube channel, 58 Keys, which is actually it's growing, but it's originally specifically for writers who use Apple gear. There's now an element that's just for writers in general, even people who use pen and paper, I know, but that's it. So there, 58 Keys on YouTube or william@appleinsider.com, and of course every week here with you.
Well, thanks again everyone for listening. I think this was a good one. Maybe go watch some Mike Judge films so I have to stop explaining them to everyone, because honestly, brilliant writer. But in any case, thank you, Masterclass and Rogue Amoeba. Thank you, Masterclass and Rogue Amoeba, for sponsoring our show this week. And if you're an Apple Insider Plus subscriber, stick around. Not only did you get an ad-free show, but you're about to get a bonus topic on, well, Apple Intelligence, but more of our personal uses of such technology and where we think it's all going. So stay tuned for that. And everyone else, we will talk next week.